we have the podium mic, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'd like to take a few minutes to just introduce our keynote speaker for this week's Flex, and it is Hugh O'Neill. He is the co-owner of Mindful Way, and he has studied and practiced meditation and yoga for more than 20 years. He's trained in Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction with Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, Dr. Saki Santorelli, and has completed teacher training at the highest level. His many years of creative and management experience in the media industry, combined with his intensive training in mindfulness meditation, enabled him to skillfully relate the concepts and practices to a wide range of populations. Hugh has taught more than 80 MBSR classes and dozens of other mindfulness programs in universities, medical centers, nonprofit, and in government and corporate settings. He has also been a presenter at international science conferences on mindfulness and is the lead mindfulness teacher excuse me, in a number of clinical research projects. Hugh has studied and lived in residence at Yokoji Zen Mountain Center under the guidance of Zen Master Charles Tenjin Flesher Roshi. Join me in welcoming Hugh to our program this week, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from him. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Is that mic on? Yes. Thank you so much, Donna. Welcome to everybody in the room. Here we are. We're going to learn about harnessing the power of mindfulness. I like that, harnessing. Gives you a sense of purpose. So, we have a lot to cover. We're going to be interactive. I like questions. There's nothing, there's no dwarf in a box or anything like that going on, if you're allowed to say that these days. What we're talking about, you're going to see, is actually scientific. And we're hopefully going to pass on some information to you that will make you stop, pause, think, breathe, and then reevaluate things in all sorts of different ways. So, let's begin. First exercise that we teach pretty much every group we work with is how to come into the present. Anybody ever heard the expression, if you just live for the now, everything will be okay? Right. Okay, so how do you get to the now? I sometimes think to myself, there's probably a boutique up in El Paseo called The Now. You can get Ferragamo shoes and Vera Wang, and it's The Now. So, what we're going to do, I want you to pause anything else you happen to be doing right now. First thing you do to get to the now is you pause, you stop. And now I want to invite you to take all your attention as best you can and bring it into your sense of sight. And I want you to look around your present environment, wherever you happen to be. But I want you to do something completely different, because since childhood we've been asked, look at that, what do you think? Look at that, what color is it? Look over there, which one do you want? I want you to look around with no agenda whatsoever. No discursive thought, if you can do it. Just the way a cat would lay there and look around. It's not wondering about redecorating. It's just observing. So just look around for a moment. And now I'd like you to take your attention and notice that you have a choice in where to place your attention. And I want you to shift that attention to the sense of hearing, if that's available for you. So please just see what happens if you just listen without agenda in this moment. And now I'd like to invite you to again take your attention and notice that you have a choice in where to place that attention. And shift that attention now into the sensations of your body in a chair if you're seated, your feet on the floor. Perhaps you can feel a garment against your skin or the air on your face. And now once again, I invite you to shift your attention by choice, this time shifting to the breath. So whether you're breathing, inhaling or exhaling through the nose or mouth, just bring awareness as much as you can to the breath in the body. And I'm going to ring a little bell. Just see if you can follow the sound of the bell till it fades out. What did anybody notice from that? You relaxed? Thank you. Anybody else?
After the bell quit, it felt like nothing. It was like I was aware of no bell.
Okay, so you were actually very present when the bell sound ended for the transition to the silence. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah?
I counted how many times you wrote it.
You which?
I counted how many times it read.
Okay. Very good. What number did you come up with?
3.
Well done. Anybody else notice anything? Yes?
I have to refocus on steps.
You had to refocus on each step? Okay. Were you able to do that? Well done. Right, so the reason, does anybody feel more present? Okay, a whole bunch of nodding heads now in the auditorium. People feeling more present. The reason why, our senses only operate in the present moment. So if you want to be in the present moment, the key is we use our senses. We'll explain more about this as we move on. So, little bit of an introduction. There I am as a kid, that's me on the right, about to head off on a camping trip. I liked every kind of sport, I liked adventure, I liked activity, I liked everything except stopping moving, except if I was stopping moving to make art or work with Lego or something. There's a rumor, it's completely untrue, that I used to break Tonka toys. That is absolutely not true. But I was very, very energetic. You wouldn't believe it to see me now, but I was. All that energy translated into a career in media and television mostly. Worked as a news producer, doing international news out of London. I took correspondence into all over the UK and Ireland. Sometimes into very dangerous situations. We went on ride-alongs in the north of Ireland. Several times we nearly didn't come back from a day's work. Covered the Lockerbie tragedy. I got to fly a NASA mission in a plane, to be clear, not in a rocket. And then little by little my work changed and I went more from hard news into documentaries and then into just about everything, including episodic television, feature films, Nickelodeon art department. So I had quite a ride through that art department, writing, producing, directing, technical stuff. And that brought me all the way from the suburbs of Dublin to Los Angeles, California. And after 12 or 15 years of very long hours and sometimes very challenging circumstances, I needed a break. I just didn't know it. And I wound up just sort of like, hey, what's this? What should I do now? And I was on the west side of Los Angeles. I lived just down the road from a huge metaphysical bookstore. I went in there. I started reading stuff. I started taking yoga classes. I wound up going to the yoga place that was founded by the guy who started the Yogi Tea Company. They did this very aggressive yoga with this mad, energetic breathing. I loved it. I didn't have any clue that it had any spiritual component. It was just like a runner's high, so I went at it. In fact, I had to go at so many things. I kind of put myself to a place where there was no turning back. I kind of just pulled on all the levers and had to go on all the rides. And found myself in a situation where I really have to learn more about this. This is no longer a hobby. This is no longer something that you just do on a Thursday night or a Saturday morning. I've created too many questions. So I took this large, what I thought was going to be a short break, and it turned into years and years and years that involved actually months on end on retreats up in meditation halls and living in very minimal circumstances, spending an awful lot of time meditating, chopping wood, carrying water, as they say in the sort of the old legends. And what I wanted to do was restore my health, and I wanted to get back in touch with happiness. I knew how to work till I dropped. And so when I was contacted by the folks, by Cheryl and Donna, to come down to College of the Desert, we came up with this idea of we want to talk about happiness, we want to talk about health, and my particular expertise at this point was mindfulness. We thought, right, let's look at health and happiness and what mindfulness can do for you in this regard. So, went and did a little bit of research. I mean, I could have said, well, health, eat vegetables, but go take a look and see what the experts say. Environment, where you live, where you grew up, those kind of things were absolutely essential. Resources. So, for health, that could include, are you eating your vegetables? Money, transport. This all creates accessibility, social connection, your education level, which helps you leverage your resources or your skills, and work. A lot of people, particularly in the Western culture, our work is so important to us. We identify so strongly with it. So then I went and had a look at happiness. And guess what? They have pretty much the same list. So health and happiness, if they have this similar things, that's really worth looking at. Okay? If this was, these are good cues. You're looking at two things you want to achieve, and they have both got very similar ingredients on some level. Then we go and have a look at what are the real serious researchers looking at. And Harvard has had this 80-year-long study on happiness. It started off with a small group of people. I'm not going to go into all the names, but one of the original people in the original early study was John F. Kennedy. Of all the things that you can be doing, and of all the things that are marketed to us, and I remember as a kid there used to be this commercial that would come on where a guy would get involved in some minor faux pas. He would go out in his fishing boat, the boat would sink, he'd wind up floating on his cooler. And then, just when it couldn't get any worse, he'd take out this cigar and he'd light it up and this music would start playing. And the punchline was, happiness is a cigar called Hamlet. And they ran all sorts of these ads with the same, it was the exact same finish each time. Many things I've met or been told since will make me happy. But what the Harvard study showed was key is relationships, bar none. In any mention of anything else, quality of your relationships is the number one factor in happiness. Community, again, your resources. There's a part here where genes or your set point. So for your health or your happiness, there's a genetic component. You could be living the life, but if your genes are predisposed for certain things, that's something you're going to have to deal with. So, in a way, some of this is don't look, right? There's an element to this that we cannot control at all, and then there's internal and external factors like our genes and our environment. So what has any of this got to do with getting healthier or happier? One of the things that emerges is we actually have leverage over how we interpret some of these factors. You can't argue with your gene pool. But there are parts of this equation that you can actually work with skillfully once you get a clue as to how it all comes together. So, in the Harvard study, they talked about set points. So that's the genetic predisposition. Because some people are just, it doesn't matter what you do, they're happy. Some people, it doesn't matter what you do, they're unhappy. I think there was something like 67% of the people canvassed who were from significant to extreme wealth were not happy. So obviously money isn't the factor, even though conditions are very important, and some of those conditions can be long-term, some of them can be transitory. The next thing they identified was action, so you can actually do something about your health and your happiness. And then they came up with a list of some effective things. Cultivate gratitude, pay attention, forgive yourself and for others, learn to love yourself, meditate, have goals, and then there's exercise, sleep, money, connection. The top 5 things on this list are all mental processes. They're all volitional mental processes. Attention, William James said that if there was an education system that taught attention, that would be an education system par excellence. All right? And the guy we're going to meet later said that love yourself. No one else in the whole world is more deserving of your own love than you yourself are. So, let's have a look about understanding some of the things that make this work. So there's obstacles, and then there's things that we can, I call them allies, things we can recruit, like our attention, like our awareness. In a separate Harvard study, interestingly, they found out that mind wandering was the number 1 predictor of happiness or mood, regardless of the circumstances. So, you could be sitting in a hot tub but thinking about your tax return. Right? You could be doing your tax return but thinking about you want to be in a hot tub. In either situation, the placing of your attention is going to, the placing of your attention off the subject is going to cause the problem. And in another study, they found out that actually mind wandering is so prevalent that in US adults, the average amount of mind wandering is 47% of the time. Which is really gives pause for thought. So if your mind's wandering 47% of the time, and that is the most significant determinant of your general mood, what would just a tiny adjustment of that do for us? So, again, this brings us back to awareness of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and perceptions. It's all in the mind. And how do we work with this skillfully? It's not all in the mind, but the portion we can control is in the mind. So, people have been trying to figure this out for thousands of years. We have wisdom schools, ancient traditions coming all the way along, and who knows, someday, 1,000 years from now, somebody may be giving a presentation and they'll be talking about the people of the early 21st century and their quest for happiness and health. I want to go back in time a little bit, and I want to talk about a character, a figure that you've probably all heard about, There was a prince in the north, in what's now modern-day northern India, about 2,600 years ago. He was trained in all the courtly arts. He was trained as an archer and a combatant and a horse rider and everything else. He was married, he had a kid. And he lived in a very, very carefully controlled environment. And then, by accident, the story goes, he got outside of the palace and he got to see what life was like in the streets of his kingdom at that time. He was so shocked by the things that he saw that he resolved that he, as the heir to the throne, would find some solutions to the public health crisis and the mental health crisis of his community. Okay? This guy's official name at the time, he was Siddhartha Gautama of the Shakya clan, known more recently to folks like you and me as the Buddha. But his mission was not to establish a religion, and he didn't establish a religion. He established the first community mental health program. And I love this, because even at the end of his life, in his teachings, he said, take what I've said, try it for yourself, and if it proves to be beneficial, use it. His diagnosis for the condition of what was really causing the pain and suffering was, right, there's suffering out there. What's the cause? Attachment and aversion. What's the cure? And he laid out a prescriptive way of working with the mind and the body in order to reduce our suffering. Because he didn't call it suffering then, he called it resistance. He took this to such an extreme that he found out that when the mind is truly calm and clear at the same time, happiness spontaneously arises. Fast forward to the 1970s, and this gentleman up here on the right, John Kabat-Zinn, who was a molecular biologist with a PhD from MIT. I usually say that means he was probably fairly smart. He was working as a molecular biologist at UMass, and he got into a conversation. He was also at the time, he had been a student of under a famous Zen master. He studied yoga and mind-body stuff in the 60s and 70s. He was very concerned with social justice, and he didn't really know what to do with it. He knew that his molecular biology training wasn't really helping him to achieve what he really wanted to achieve in his life. I heard this recently, actually just a few weeks ago, from somebody who heard this from John Kabat-Zinn in a conversation, that John Kabat-Zinn was at the water cooler in the hospital. He ran into a pain management physician, and just over the water cooler went, so how many of the people who come in for the pain management do you help? And the answer was somewhere between 15 and 30% of the people. And he goes, so what happens to the rest of them? We don't know. And it was at that point that John Kabat-Zinn decided, he says it came in a flash, just got it. He was going to take these things he'd been learning about mind-body connection, these ancient teachings about how to work with pain and suffering, and he was going to turn them into something that you could teach sans any of the religious or cultural impediments. So just the practices. And he started teaching them in the basement of the hospital. He called it the Stress Reduction Clinic. He did that in relative obscurity until Bill Moyers was making a program about healing in the mind, and Bill Moyers took the course. Show went out on PBS with Bill Moyers actually taking the program that John Kabat-Zinn had devised called MBSR. And that started to create some traction. Now that was in the 90s, so you fast forward now, and derivations of John's teachings, which are based on these ancient wisdom teachings, are being taught around the world. John focused on stress. He thought stress, people in the hospital setting are coming in with back pain, depression, diabetes, they're having a procedure for something, they can't work, or they're limited in their work. we can't address all the medical stuff. We can help them work with the stress. And we get that term from this guy, Hans Selye, who actually was he was an endocrinologist. He was trying to research a specific hormone or set of hormones, but his rats kept getting sick with something else, and he eventually traced that back to how he handled them. In other words, the environment in which the lab rats lived was creating other health conditions for them. And he labeled that stress. So, when we talk about stress, the original in Siddhartha Gautama's time, he came up with the word dukkha, which was resistance. Another researcher in the 20th century came up with an idea that stress is a situation that is appraised as taxing or exceeding our resources, and in so it creates a sense of threat. So our reduced ability to respond registers as a threat, so we need to learn to work with that skillfully. So, does stress affect health? Yes. I mean, how many people here, has stress affected your health? Put up your hand. Okay. And the research would show, yes, indeed it does. So, now we come to a little bit of question time. Could you name for me some things you consider stressful?
Deadlines.
Okay, you got deadlines. Hunger, yeah, absolutely. Lack of access to food would be a major stressor. It's not just over 10 minutes before the next In-N-Out burger. Okay, do you recognize any of these? Anybody else want to chime in? Anybody else name a stressor for me? Moving. Yeah, relocating. That actually can be very high, because even if we're moving to a better circumstance, we may have a familiarity, a deep familiarity with where we are. Anybody else? Temperature. Okay. Short term or long term? It can be a factor. Does anybody agree with these? And now we have added the wonder of social media and the 24-hour news cycle and always on. My next question for you: what does stress feel like in your body? And you better start calling out some answers. Pain. Okay, somebody else give us one. Headache. Sweating. Okay, sweating, stomach upset. Give us a couple more. Dis-ease. Yeah. Anything on a very specific physical level? Does anybody experience tightness, muscle tightness? Tight jaw, tight shoulders, right? Clenching, fatigue. What was that? Exhausted but can't sleep. Okay, here comes some answers. So we've named some of these things. There's tightness, there's change in appetite, there can be sweating, clenching jaw, interruption in sleep. How about attention? Anybody have any issue with attention? Yeah, a whole bunch of nodding heads out here. Right, so does anybody here ever hear the term fight or flight? Okay. So our fight or flight, what's that for? Survival is the word we're looking for. This is important also. Okay, so in a situation where our fight or flight is a hardwired response our body has, all organisms have it. Plants have a different way of doing things because they can't run, but they can do some very interesting things. But organisms in the I'm losing my words here between fauna and flora. Fauna. Hands up if you're a fauna. If you're a fauna, you have built-in fight or flight. So you have motility, you can move. When we perceive a threat that triggers the fight or flight response, there's a cascade of chemical messengers run through our body because we want to adapt very rapidly to our most highly survivable state. So if you look at this, our heart rate goes up, our respiratory rate goes up. And why does that happen? Because we want the blood pumping, highly oxygenated blood to the large muscles. Okay? Change in digestive system, because the digestive system starts to shut down, so blood being used in the digestive system can go to a large muscle. Right? It's an all hands on deck arrangement. So crazy things happen in the musculoskeletal system. The outside of our skin gets less blood. The center of the muscles get more blood. We actually have less blood on the outside so that we'll bleed less if we're injured in a confrontation or a fall. Pupils dilate. Other senses may shrink down. If you read the book Blink, there's a report in there that during the Rodney King incident, the police officers were so hyped up, amped up on adrenaline, they could not hear what Rodney King was saying. They couldn't hear commands from the other officers. All they could do was see a target. So, in extreme circumstances, this fight or flight mechanism overwhelms everything that is not necessary for pure survival. And this is worth bearing in mind. So, blood pressure goes up, as I said, respiratory rate goes up, heart rate goes up, immune system starts to go dormant, and over a period of time, unless you're highly trained in operating in super stressful situations, the blood starts to recede from the frontal cortex. Has anybody ever had a lot to do and you're really busy and you're just about to go out the door and then you can't find your keys? Raise your hand. Has anybody ever had a minor panic when that's happened? Yeah. Have your keys gotten further away? Because what's happening is your body is moving into fight or flight response, and the part of your brain that remembers where you put your keys when you came in last night is going offline. Okay? So, this thing we call fight or flight response is the same as our stress response. Hardwired for survival, designed to operate as a response to an immediate physical threat. Now, can you imagine every time you were going along the 111, if somebody cut in front of you, if you slammed on your brakes and your airbag went off? Okay? You haven't had a collision, you've just had all the consequences of a collision. The rest of our relatives in nature are designed to live this way. Okay? This zebra is going to get chased. I can nearly hear David Attenborough's voice just at the moment I see this. And the rhythmic tribal drumming. If that zebra gets away, that zebra is not going to need therapy. Because that zebra grew up knowing that I live in the Serengeti, there are lions. If you see one, run like heck. If you get away, shake about for a minute, and then go back to eating grass. By contrast, when our fight or flight is triggered, and all of these things where we have the big flush of chemical messengers through the adrenal cortex, whatever it is, the adrenaline, the cortisol, all that pumping. In its original application, we would do like the zebra. We would run, we would fight, we would swim, we would have to climb. In the words of the urban myth, we would lift the vehicle off of the child and then get on with our day. And I've actually come across research of things where people did lift something. There was one I came across, somebody had lifted something that weighed 900 kilos in a moment without thinking about it. which I think is close to £3,000. And then in this situation, afterwards we rest. We survived the jackals, the hyenas. We survived the flood that swept us down the river, the fishing accident where we fell off the dock. We rest, we replenish, and then we return to homeostasis. Okay? This is what the zebras do. Hey buddy, what happened? You'll never believe it, I got chased by a lion. Wow, yeah. Dude, that happened to me last week. Here, have some grass. And I'm not talking that California version. We, by comparison, think about it, because we've got a brain that operates past, present, and future. We think it over and over. Right? Yeah, tell us more about the zebra. Do you want to move it up to 2 sessions a week? Yeah. Or the big lion. Okay? So what happens with us is stressful event is triggered. Our fight or flight system is called into action. It takes over. It raises the heart rate, the blood pressure. It changes the blood in the digestive system. It opens our eyes like saucers. It shuts down a whole bunch of our other senses. If we have that in our bloodstream without getting all that exercise, without completing the cycle, these hormones stay in our bloodstream. They keep our blood pressure elevated. They keep our heart rate elevated. They starve the immune system and the digestive system and the reproductive system. And then we feel uncomfortable. So what do? Well, here we are, we're in the Coachella Valley for today. You have a whole range of places where you can go in and be cut off from the outside world, and they have a buffet all you can eat, and you can drink, smoke, and gamble your brains out and have a wild time, which could be fun if you do it in moderation, but if you're not doing it in moderation, like so many things, it can lead to further problems. Okay? So this is what we call maladaptive coping. The stress continues because the chemical messengers are there long after the stressor has left. And we get stuck on a kind of a treadmill. Thinking about the thing that bothers us, feeling bad about the thing that bothers us, taking something or doing something to try and make the feeling go away, and then it just comes back. Because we're not consciously aware of the full set of circumstances that we're dealing with. So, if you have a look at this, you may recognize, based on your aptitude, what you want to be doing in your future. Nobody laughed at that. The timeline of this picture is approximately ballpark 2.5 million years. Okay? From the character at the left, that's approximately 2.5 million years ago. The guy with the jackhammers from the middle of the 19th century. So the three people in the middle, that's what most of our ancestors were like up until a couple of hundred years ago. So all the people we are descended from spent their time hunting, gathering, living in relationship to nature. I can bet you every single one of them always ate organic. That'll take a moment to settle in too. Why? Because there weren't any pesticides, because there wasn't agribusiness, right? They lived and died by the cycles of the sun, the moon, the weather. And then all of a sudden in our evolutionary history, we started fashioning advanced tools and came to a place where we could manipulate our environment like never before, and we started to subjugate rather than be in harmony with. And in a short space of time, maybe 10 generations, we go from hunter-gatherer to information worker. Let's go back. There's huge differences in all kinds of things to do with our way of living, but what is incredibly important also to bear in mind is our fight or flight mechanism, up until we get to the dude with the jackhammer, that's not entirely fair, but if you back it up to say the Middle Ages, to the 14th or 15th century, before organized states, countries, what we now call countries, the level of mano-a-mano violence was extraordinary. And for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, the homicide rate was between 15 to 35% amongst males. You fast forward now, and even as tragic as the things that we are facing, rather than 15,000 per 100,000 being murdered, we're in the United States somewhere between 6 and 7 per 100,000. So our entire way of being has changed, but because we still carry in our gene pool our negativity bias, we are roughly 19 to 1 predisposed to focus on the negative. And there's very good reason for this. And the reason is you could actually go out in the woods for 19 days, and if you saw something really scary near the berries, you could walk away or run. And you could do that for 19 days and still be strong enough to go out and have a go at day 20 and see if you could get something to eat. You can only be lunched once. So, we're operating with this ancient way of thinking down there in the background, when we should be operating like a industrial age 4.0 rather than hunter-gatherer 1.0 or 1.2. And I really want you to pay attention to this, because we have industries, advertising, politics, all sorts of things. They operate on that 19 to 1 ratio. They want to scare the heck out of us and get a reaction. So, our fight or flight response, kind of like prescription medication, should be in moderate dose and only when it's really needed. Okay? We don't list the side effects, but if you were to, you know those commercials where, talk to your doctor about Xylumpia. Our fight or flight response, the side effects include high blood pressure, mood disorder, elevated heart rate, diabetes, and insomnia. Okay? So, here's a list of our frequent stressors. And most of those aren't going away anytime soon. Okay? They're ongoing. We have a way of life now that involves all those things. So, you can't change, and there's external stuff. Things happening in the outside world, what the Fed's doing, what dictators in different places are doing, what idiots down the street are doing, what your kids or your parents are doing, what the weather's doing, what the traffic's doing. That's all external to us. Internal. How we relate to our experience. And this is what the original public mental health guru came up with, was you can't do anything about that till it actually, you touch it, taste it, hear it, see it, or feel it. As soon as it enters inside this bubble into your direct sensory experience, then that is where you have control. So we say you can't fight the waves, but you can learn how to surf. I'm still trying. So let's pause, just check in for a moment. Let's just connect with your sense of sight once again. Just look around for a moment. Shift now by choice to the hearing. Feel your body in the chair. Connect with your breath. I'd like to invite you to do a little exercise. I want you to imagine that you have a wedge of lemon, and I want you to bring it up to your mouth and bite into it. What did you notice?
Saliva.
Okay, did anybody have a tense jaw or anything? Sour. Okay, so your body just made a physiologic response to an imagined problem. And it does that all the time. So if you imagine yourself now somewhere else, just picture anywhere in your mind, just picture yourself any place. Open your eyes. Name some of the places you imagine. Okay, Bora Bora. So somebody's off in the South Pacific while sitting in the room. Did anybody else go anywhere far away? Hawaii. Okay, somebody went, right, Pacific's in this season. This is a common answer. A beach. People go to beaches. You know, here you are in a place with a lot of pretty luxurious amenities, and everybody still leaves for somewhere else.
What does it mean if I was imagining myself driving a truck?
Good choice. The real thing with this is our body takes the journey with us. And this goes back to our 47% mind wandering. If you're in the traffic but you're thinking about something else, and why does this happen? Because we want to know, do I like this? And we check in for what it feels like. Oh, it's the latest such and such. Maybe another time. And you put it down. But we're test driving all of our experiences, moment to moment, whether we're conscious of it or not. And then we're sending the bill to our body, whether we're conscious of it or not. Okay? So, if you're firing off low-level fight or flight as you're driving to the supermarket where you've got your reusable bags and the supermarket is well stocked and you've got enough money in your pocketbook to cover your meals for the day or the week, but you're thinking about what you don't have or whatever it happens to be. If you're not monitoring what your brain's doing, you may as well give one of your kids a credit card and say, here's my Amazon password, enjoy yourself. So, what do we do? What this all comes down to, and we're going to whiz through this, is thousands of years ago they identified, or one guy in particular and then a whole bunch of other people, and he probably wasn't the only one because somebody in France invented penicillin in the late 18th century or the late 19th century, and he just was a peasant so nobody listened to him. So I'm not saying one person got the goods on this all that time ago and they were the only person ever. But paying attention so that we notice, we train to be aware of the body, we train to be aware of what the mind's doing, so that we'll notice things like, wow, my shoulders are up in my ears, what's that? That's an evolutionary response to stop somebody cutting your neck off. And it happens when the fight or flight hormones are strong. So when you're like this, walking around, I don't know if I'm stressed. These are cues, and we have them. We're wired to know what they are. We've just overridden them. Because you think about it, you go up there and you go to Trader Joe's. How often do you see people in Trader Joe's going like this? Frozen aisle this way. We're not doing that. No, we're just on autopilot. We're thinking about binge watching something on Netflix when we get home while we're absent-mindedly rooting around for the nicest looking rutabaga. So mindfulness is a natural state. I put the refresh button. You know, you wake up in the morning, if you've left your computer on, it's yesterday's news until you hit the refresh and find out it hasn't improved. All of these things that we live with in our modern lives, which don't demand of us moment to moment to be absolutely, did you hear a crack of a twig? Did you smell that? Right? We're not smelling out for bison or antelope scat and all the cues of an environment. In fact, we do everything we can to avoid the cues of our environment. So, all of these things, avalanches, failure to launch, or even a little bit of South American cave looting, that's not how most of us live. So we need to be, John Kabat-Zinn defined mindfulness. He says, it's a skill. It's paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally in the present moment. And the non-judgmentally is not to be confused with apathy and tuning out. It's actually tuning in right to the center. Okay? It can be trained with formal and informal practices. Sorry, I showed that because there's a puppy in an airplane. So you train slightly differently, but you train a puppy or you train to use the equipment. And we can train to use our equipment. We're wired for it. We just haven't been accessing it. Okay? So sometimes we refer to it as mental floss, which is mindfulness meditation. We sit, we notice what's going on, we use our breath or our body or sound as an anchor. When we catch our mind drifting off, we come back. And we sit there and it can seem very boring, but little by little our body starts to let go. We start to become more present. The perseveration, we start to see our stories for what they are. They start to wind down. We feed them less, which allows us more time in the present. And we start to learn more about who we are as we do this. And it also has very, very significant physiological, neurological, measurably significant changes in brain and body in a space as short as 2 months. So, you practice like a sport or learning to play an instrument. You can use it in everything. Just pay attention when you're making your coffee. Just pay attention when you're brushing your teeth. Just pay attention when you're queuing up your golf stroke. We had somebody take a course years back with us, knocked 8 strokes off their golf game. There will be a Q&A in a second. Did you have a question or are you just exercising? Okay, that's careful. You know what? You nearly bought yourself a vase. Don't do that at Bonds. They go, congratulations, this Ming Dynasty ceramic is now yours for $2.4 million. Use it in communication so you're paying attention. We teach people in our courses when your communication is mostly listening. Listen mindfully. Learn what you do when you think you're listening. A lot of people think listening is just watching the other lips. As soon as they stop, you get your point in. Okay? It's not. Listen with your body. Mindful eating. If you eat mindfully, and that means not watching gadgets or TV or stuff like that, it changes your experience of the food. And it has actually been shown to affect not only what you eat, but how much. You make better choices. It's being used for weight control. I'm actually training somebody now who's a physician who is planning to, they want to expand mindfulness into working for weight loss. Mindful driving. This is chitty chitty bang bang here on the left, right? It's a team of 2 to drive at 20 miles an hour. And these days we're talking to people on the far side of the world, posting photographs, drinking an exotic coffee drink. And thank God somebody went and made a car that can allow us to crash unconsciously at 50 miles an hour and be able to stand outside of it after the experience and exchange your information rather than, having a note that says, please don't send flowers in the newspaper. So we can use mindfulness in every aspect of our lives, and anytime we come back to the breath or the senses, we're opening a door to the present moment. It's the only moment available to us. It's the fulcrum of our reality. Okay? I'm going to blaze through this because we got started a little bit late. Is this being researched? You betcha. Early research showed that people doing mindfulness meditation had a much higher antibody muster against flu vaccine. There's been brain imaging studies that shows 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation, 30 minutes a day, produces measurable changes in cortical thickness. There's some stuff out there now that's starting to show that mindfulness meditation can affect telomerase, which means more accurate reproduction of our cells. It's being used in leadership all over the place. It's been featured in the media. It's been taught around the world. It's been used in, like I said, major corporations, sports teams. On the left, we have a law enforcement officer. On the right, we have Representative Ryan from Ohio. Are there any risks? Yes. If people who are recently in recovery, it's a tricky one. They need to get some time under their belt. Other than that, for the most part, no. But it will put you in touch with who you really are, where you've come from, and what's going on. So if you're averse to reality, not recommended. Because the clarity may require change. And interestingly, the changes that take place in the brain are so significant. The mindfulness meditation practices, they activate parts of the brain that are associated with a more inclusive worldview. So the more we practice, the less threatened we feel, the more open we become. And that has its benefits. So, the founder of the program that we teach the most, the program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, John Kabat-Zinn, would say, so long as you're breathing, there's a lot more right with you than there is wrong with you. And the noted Holocaust survivor who searched to really get his head around the meaning of life is purported to have said, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is the power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So, that's a lot of information in a short space of time. If we have time for questions or any input, let me know. Yes, please.
Do you have anything that I was just noticing in the whole way this is put together, a sense of humor, but it's not specified anywhere in your presentation. Would you like to comment on humor?
Laughter is actually mentioned in the Harvard study.
Okay.
Yeah, humor is laughter. Those kind of things. I mean, usually you laugh with other people. Unless you're a super villain, you're like in your lair. But that's probably not producing happiness. Yeah, laughter is correlated with very positive things for the body. Anybody else? Yes.
If you have a very busy schedule and you don't have 3 minutes to do at one time, is like exercise like you need 10 minutes here and there, 10 minutes here and there. Is it human fit or is it
Good question, great question. The general rule is that frequency beats out duration. So 10 minutes a day for 30 days would be 300 minutes. That would be better than doing just 5 hours on one Saturday. Because you're building a habit. And that's what we want. We want to replace less helpful habits with more helpful habits of attention. Having said that, you say you don't have the time to do 30 minutes a day. The shortest duration of exposure that I've read any research on is 13 minutes a day. If you were to do 13 minutes a day, we know that will actually eventually be able to be measured. But think about it like this. If 47% of your waking day is mind wandering now, on average, and you take 30 minutes of that, and let's say you have a 16-hour day if you get 8 hours sleep. So, watch me screw the mental arithmetic on this. So you got 16 hours, 47% of that. So we're just talking just under 8 hours, so like 7 hours and 45 minutes. We're mind wandering. Now, if you use 30 minutes of that 7 hours of 45 minutes of mind wandering, what kind of benefit do you think you're going to get? There's an investment required. You have to watch less of something, or do less of something, or budget your time better for something to do this. But what happens is, over time, you wind up recovering a huge chunk of that 47% of mind wandering. Imagine if that was only 27%. Okay? That would give you 4 extra hours a day of keen, aware, engaged behavior, whatever you happen to choose to do. Now, you might be at the sports bar, but you won't be missing any of the games on any of the TVs. Right? And you'll definitely know when you need to flag down the waitress because your glass is getting empty. Does anybody else have any questions about this? Anything at all? All right. There are all kinds of resources if you really want to look into this. There are free resources, there are paid resources, and like lots of things, if it's free, read the small print. If it's paid, read the small print. So I'd just like to thank all of you for showing up. My thanks to Cheryl and Donna, and also to the technical crew who are working overtime there at the background, making sure lots more people have access to this as we go. And I'll be around for a few minutes after if anybody